Emmanuel, which means God is with us. Dios está con nosotros. God is with us. God is present in this place. I don't know about you, but I've been worshiping God this morning. I mean, when I came in here, and I'll take you there, that place where there's no crying, that place where there's no worrying. When that worship team started telling me, I'll take you there, I was going there. I mean, they took me there. Did anybody else go along with them? And then we're going to end the sermon today with the words from Oceans. But, I mean, there comes a time where you just step out upon the water, and it's over your head, and you don't know where you're going to find the sustenance to get you through. And somehow God is present in the mystery. The mystery carries you through. And it just helps you to just surrender, to release, We're going to look today at what it is to worship God, what it is to find that presence of God, to know that God is with us, to know that when I step out upon that water, my feet may fail, but I'm not going down, that God is with me. And I want to start with a story that speaks to the presence of the angel this morning, that speaks to a love that is beyond what we knew, a love that surrounds us, that beyond what we're aware of, that dances all around, even if we are unaware. It's a story about a couple that gave birth to their second child in China in 1994. And this was during the height of the one-child policy, which was enforced very strictly. And so the couple kept the pregnancy and the birth secret. And then when the child was 3 days old, the father took her to an orphanage. And along the way, he describes the day. I prepared her milk. I held her and hugged her for a while. Then I walked to the orphanage. She didn't cry. She was asleep. I kissed her gently. I knew it was the final farewell. He did what he had to do. Not long after that, a couple from Michigan adopted the child, took her back to a white suburban community in Michigan where she grew up. They named her Katie. The orphanage gave them a document from the birth parents that said in Chinese, because of poverty and other problems, we had no choice but to abandon our daughter. If you have sympathy for us as parents, please meet us on the broken bridge in Hangzhou in 10 or 20 years' time. So 10 years later, the couple came to the bridge. And every year after that, they came to the bridge. And as the years went by, their hopes faded. But they continued to come out every year. The Michigan couple never told Katie about this until she was 20. One day she was in the car riding and she asked her mom about her adoption. And her mother told her the story. And they arranged to put her on a plane. They alerted the birth parents. And it was all filmed. It's, of course, on YouTube or somewhere. But there's footage of the birth parents walking to the meeting place. The father says, what can we say when we meet? 10,000 sorries will not be enough. They arrive, and the mother falls at the daughter's feet. Talks about her sorrow and her sadness and how sorry she is. Well, they were sorry, but what choice did they have? They did what they had to do. Their love burned for their daughter 20 years later, even though they had only been able to be with her for 3 days. So Katie stayed with them for several days at their home. She got to know them. She got to see the care that they had for her. And when she went back to Michigan, she said, "I always knew my adoptive parents loved me. And then I have this whole other love that I never knew existed." Now, on the one hand, she did know. She knew she had been born in China. She knew the details of that, but she had never experienced that love until this time. And when she spent some time there, she experienced this love. And my guess is this is only the beginning. I mean, if I think about my own daughter's experiences, if I think of other folks that have reconnected with a home, with a birthplace many years later, this may just be the beginning of the journey. There may be a whole thing that she has to uncover about herself, a whole journey that's before her. So I'm interested in using this image this morning to think about our own lives and this love that maybe we never knew existed. Or maybe we did know it existed, but maybe we haven't had the chance to live in it, to be at home in it, to fully experience the care of it. I mean, on the one hand, it may be around a home country. It may be a place of birth. We live in an empire that wants to cut off ties from other places, but there may be really something there. And I want to also just venture into the idea that there may be something around our birth parent, our Creator, the one who put us together in our mother's womb, the one who carefully crafted us, the one who created us, an individual creation, as the psalm tells us, in our mother's womb, the one who made us who we are, the one who knows more than we do who we are, what our purpose is, what we can do, what our gifts are. How well acquainted are we with the one who created us, the one who knows us? Like Katie, it's so easy to get acclimated to the ways of our adoptive place and world, and we live in that, but how hard it can be sometimes to get attuned to the ways of God, to get attuned to the ways of our Creator. We don't have to go to China, but maybe it's harder than going to China. Maybe it's so present to us, so much all around us, that it's just so hard to grasp. And every now and then, there's a breakthrough, isn't there? There's a moment when you are so afraid that you call out despite yourself, that your defenses fall down, that you are in such need, that you are in such a moment that you cry out to God despite yourself. Oh, I remember that moment. I had a terrible traffic accident with my whole family in the car, and as the metal crunched, I just said, "Jesus, help me," right? Boom, right? That's what comes out. In that moment when we need God, sometimes those defenses fall down and we're in God's presence. Well, I want to explore this in terms of the story of Joseph and the angel that we just read this morning. Joseph was in the presence of a love that was so overwhelming, he had no idea what he was into. He was about to be in a parenting relationship with a child conceived and born of the Holy Spirit. He had no idea what he was into. And yet he was so attached to the ways of the world, he was so unable to see what was going on, that he just kind of naturally went along with what his culture told him, what his society told him. Here was a woman who was with child and wasn't married, and in this kind of patriarchal order that he lived in, there was some disrespect and disgrace toward this, and he was going to distance himself from it. He was just going to leave her. That's what his society told him to do. That's what his culture told him to do. He was going to leave her. And he wasn't necessarily a bad guy. He wasn't going to make a big deal of it. He was going to leave her quietly, but he was going to abandon her. Leave her on his own. That's what everything in his world was telling him to do. And then one night, this angel broke through. God broke through. It came in the form of a dream. We talked last week about how an angel came to Zechariah in the temple. And this priest in the temple, in charge of the worship of God, was so shocked to experience God in the temple, he was filled with fear. He didn't know what to do to actually experience God in the temple. And he was so overwhelmed with fear that he was struck mute. Today we are looking at a story where an angel comes to Joseph in a dream and speaks to his fears and says, don't be afraid, Joseph. Don't be afraid to take Mary as your wife. Don't be afraid to do what you want to do. Don't be afraid to live the love that you know in the bottom of your heart is what you were called to do. Don't be so drawn by social convention. Don't be so thrown off track what other people think, what others' expectations are. Do what you were called to do, Joseph. And when he woke up, he did it. Now, admittedly, we don't have all the details of this story. You know, we do not know why Joseph was going to leave her. We don't know, maybe he thought Mary cheated on him. Maybe he was hurt. Who knows what was going on? This is not a telenovela. We don't get the details. We don't get the drama. We don't know who did what to who and all that, because that's not the purpose of this story. The Gospels have two birth stories of Jesus, one in Luke, one in Matthew. Mark and John don't even have birth stories. We're not in the realm of history here. This is not a historical occurrence. This is decades later. They didn't know who Jesus was at this point. Jesus is a nobody. Nobody's writing his story at this point. Nobody's keeping track of the details of what happened at this point. Jesus is born to peasant parents. Luke says he was born in a stable because his parents lived in Nazareth, but they came down to Bethlehem to give birth in a stable because there was no room in the inn. In Matthew's gospel, he's born at home because they actually live in Bethlehem, and so he's born at home. Doesn't matter, because that's not what the gospel's about. Gospel doesn't care how he got to Bethlehem. The gospel only cares that he was born in Bethlehem, because there's a prophetic tradition that the Messiah is born in Bethlehem. So they found a poetic. See, we got to enter into the mythology of the ancient world. They don't just come out with boring stuff like Jesus was divine. They don't try to bring a theology, a rational kind of thing. No, they give us these incredible stories. And the details aren't what's important. What is important is the themes that are happening underneath the stories. Luke's story has shepherds, and Matthew's story has wise men. But they're serving the same function. They're helping us to know that this is an incredible occurrence that has happened. So we don't know the details of what the relationship. We don't know if this was an arranged marriage, if they were in love, if Joseph saw her secretly somewhere. We don't know how old she is. We don't know any of this stuff. But what we do know is that there are these themes that are like knocking us over the head, that are so clear, that we talked about last week. The themes from last week are the same as the themes from this week. These angels, these messengers of God, come and speak to people in the midst of their lives, whether it's in the temple or in a dream or on the street. And the messenger, the angel, throws everything up in the air. The angel, what was that word we used last week? I can't even remember words anymore. What's the word? Disruption. The angel disrupts the social order. The angel disrupts their lives. This incredible disruption. But it's a disruption that leads to discipleship. It's a disruption that takes them out of the dead-end path of the world that they're on with all its false promises and glittering gold that takes us nowhere but loneliness. And it takes us into the path of God, the path that doesn't look like much, the path where you may end up giving birth to a child in a stable, the path where you have to face the disgrace of the world and stand up against it. It's a hard road, but it's a beautiful road. It's a road that leads to glory. It's a road that leads to hallelujah. It's that road that the Staple Singers are singing about. It's that I'll take you there. There's nobody worrying. There's nobody crying. That's the road. It's not an easy road, but it's a road to God. That's what the story's about. So in this difficult moment, when Joseph has a hard decision to make for him, because of the way he's listening to voices that aren't his, an angel comes, a messenger comes. So how do we get in touch with the messenger from God? How do we get away from the distractions and the distortions? How do we let all those negative voices and the voices that are leading us astray, how do we know? How do we discern the angel's voice? How do we discern the voice that's taken us to the place of God? Well, as we said last week, one, if there's no disruption, it's probably not an angel. If it's telling you something comfortable, it's probably not an angel. It's going to be probably intense. At least all the angel stories that show up in the Bible, it's intense. So if you're afraid, you might be on the right track. One of the interesting things that happens in this story is that the angel helps Joseph to get all the facts. How many times are you in a contentious situation, things aren't going well, your relationship's falling apart, things aren't working out, and you don't actually realize what's really going on? You decide that so-and-so doesn't like you anymore because they said something, and you decide, well, that means, and it goes back to this, and you've got this whole thing that you've laid out that's not actually even true. So we don't know the details, but we do know that Joseph has somehow assumed something about Mary that makes him think that he doesn't want to be with her anymore. But it turns out he doesn't have the information. He hasn't actually talked to her yet. He hasn't actually found out what's real. He's just he created this whole thing in our minds. We do that a lot, don't we? Don't we kind of take our problem from 1 to 10, intensify it? We become our own personal telenovela. We dramatize, right? So the first thing that the angel does is helps Joseph find out what's real. Actually, Joseph, Mary loves you, and this child is of this Holy Spirit. And you're going to want to be in this family. This is the family you're going to want to be in. So Joseph, get over whatever your thing is. Whatever it is, get over it and be with her. The second thing is that the angels take us beyond the limits of rational thought. A lot of us, especially because we got a lot of liberals in here, or at least progressives who have liberal tendencies. Maybe liberals that have progressive tendencies, whatever. But we get real rational, don't we? We're going to figure it out. We're going to make it work. We're going to do it on our own. We're going to figure out the answer. We're going to do good. We're doing what's right. Well, as far as Joseph knows, he's doing what's right in his society. And right ain't working right now. Stuff's gotten way past rational. I don't know that the old strategies are really going to take us where we need to go at this point. I mean, we've been doing what we do, whether it's organizing or trying to figure out our relationships along this rational path for a long time. And I don't know, when the Senate starts passing bills in the middle of the night, and they're bills that nobody's even read, and they're bills that got all kind of scratches on them in the margins, and it turns out there was a $280 billion error made in the bill, and it was rushed through in the middle of the night, and it's taken medicine away from sick people, and it's taken money away from college students. We're not living in rational times. I mean, when the president wants to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, this is not a rational thing. Anybody with any sanity, even if they're conservative, can be. This isn't about that. Wouldn't do that. But this is like evangelical right-wing craziness, millennialism, moving to Jerusalem so the end of times will come. I mean, this is like, they're not going to take me down with that Russia thing. We're going to blow the world up. This is insanity we're into. I read a really interesting quote from since I read the book of Adrienne Marie Brown. I've been reading her blog now, and she says, "I believe we're living on the precipice of the next phase of our species. And I want to be with good people, people who cry hard and laugh harder. We feel what's gaping and yawning underneath both of these releases, the scale of love grief that can't be captured in any words." I think these are times when we got to be able to move beyond what we think might be a good idea. And we got to open ourselves to revelation. Revelation is a scary word for liberal people. Revelation is that information that comes to us from beyond what we think is our common sense. But when you're living in apocalyptic times, and apocalypse really means revelation. That's the Greek word for revelation. It's, the book of Revelation. I think we might need to do a sermon series on the book of Revelation, because the book of Revelation lays out what's happening in the empire. I never understood the book of Revelation until I took a course with Daniel Berrigan, this Jesuit priest who was known for disrupting war and all that kind of stuff. Who really laid out Revelation, and what it just describes the empire, and it describes the beast is the Roman Empire. It's just this incredible revelation that helps us understand what's going on in the world. And the Bible tries to break through our rational paralysis, as King talked about the paralysis of analysis. We're so stuck, and to break through, to let God break through, we got to trust in something that's beyond us, and we got to open ourselves to something that is divine. That is, I can't find what page I'm on. Where we go? See, my rational process didn't work at all. I don't think I even printed the last page. All right. That don't matter. All right. So God said, see, sometimes you just got to throw the script away. The script isn't taking you where you need to go. So when the Spirit is available to us, the Spirit is present, and you know it and I know it. As sure as that Katie knew that she had birth parents in China, you know that you have another Creator. You know that there is something more to who you are. You know that there is a love that is beyond any love, and every now and then it breaks in. Every now and then you catch a glimpse of it. Every now and then when you let your defenses down enough, it comes in so that you can taste it and you know it's real. And then we close the door because we're afraid, because we don't want to go. We don't want to, Jesus is out there going, "I'll take you there. I'm telling you, ain't nobody crying, ain't nobody worrying." And we go, I don't know. I don't know if I want to go there yet. I'm afraid. Our fear comes up. But I want to invite us to surrender. I want to invite us to just take that step out upon the water, where feet may fail. Yes, your feet may fail. Yes, you're going into situations in your life where your feet may fail, where your mind may fail, where your best judgment may fail, where all your best efforts might be enough. That's the nature of the world we live in. But the promise of the gospel is that God will be with you. That when you step out upon the water, there is one that will be walking with you. And if you sink like Peter did, there is one that will hold you up and help you to walk. That you can do what that heart is calling you to do. That you can do what you know you're being called to do. That you can take that step. You can allow the Spirit of God to guide you, because it will not fail you. It may take you through some rough roads, but it will not fail you. Everything we do is about connecting us with God. It's about, we come here to move out of empire, to move out of the ways of the world, and to try to just be in a space that allows us to be attuned to the wavelength of God, to just allow God to speak, to allow ourselves to hear, to allow ourselves to surrender. I want to invite us today, during this Advent season, to watch for God, to watch for the unexpected places where God is showing up in your life, to take the risk, to take the steps, to allow God's grace to touch you, to allow yourself to experience a love that you may not be that familiar with. Gracious God, we give you thanks today. We give you praise today, God. We open ourselves to your overwhelming presence, your gentle and sometimes undetected presence, your majesty and your humility, your power and your gentleness. We surrender, God, to your grace, to your love, to what you're calling us to what we've been fighting. We trust you. Open our hearts. In Jesus' name.